Welcome. Thanks for being here. I want to get right to our questions from our audience. This is Richard Katz. He's from Needham, Massachusetts. He works in the restaurant industry. Richard, welcome. How you doing?
Good evening. Thank you.
Sorry for the confusion over here. Hey, Frank, you're about to... Yeah,
be careful.
Okay. There we go.
I have large feet.
There's a joke in there, but I'm not saying anything.
Senator, your climate plan is specific about how you will spend $16 trillion, and I'm delighted that somebody's willing to spend that much. Can you be equally specific about where that money is coming from? For example, you say that you'll tax fossil fuel companies, but the central idea behind addressing climate change is the limiting use of fossil fuels. How much money can you raise from companies whose income will be drastically reduced or eliminated, and where else will the money come from?
If I could, Richard, is the name? Yeah. Let me begin predicating everything I'm going to say to you this evening. Donald Trump thinks that climate change is a hoax. I think that Donald Trump is dangerously wrong. I may be old-fashioned, but I believe in science. And Richard, as I'm sure you know, what the scientists have told us, climate change is real. It is caused by human activity. It is already causing devastating problems in this country and around the world. And most frighteningly, what they tell us is if we don't get our act together and make massive changes away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy within the next 11 years, the damage done to our country and the rest of the world will be irreparable. So Richard is quite right. We are proposing the largest, most comprehensive climate change program ever presented by any candidate in the history of the United States. So where do we get, and let me, even before I tell you where we get the money, and I will do that. People say, well, Bernie, you're spending a lot of money. Is it realistic? And my response to them is it realistic to not listen to the scientists and to create a situation where the planet that our children and grandchildren and future generations will be living in will be increasingly uninhabitable and unhealthy? Is that realistic? So I think we have a moral responsibility to act and act boldly. And to do that, yes, it is going to be expensive. This is how we get the money for a start, insanely. But honestly, what goes on right now is we are giving the fossil fuel industry approximately $400 billion every single year in subsidies and tax breaks. Obviously, we end that. And we are paying for this over a 15-year period, by the way. Second of all, we believe that the federal government is the best way to move aggressively to produce sustainable energy like wind and solar. We will expand concepts, public power concepts like the TVA right now, to produce wind and solar and actually make a profit on that as we sell that to electric companies all over the world. Thirdly, we are not going to have to spend money on the military defending oil interests around the world. We can cut military spending there as well. Fourthly, our program will create up to 20 million good-paying jobs over the period of the 15 years. And when we do that, you're going to have a lot of taxpayers out there who will be paying more in taxes. You'll have people who are not getting food stamps and so forth. So those are the basic ways that we pay for this program. But most importantly, we are dealing with what the scientists call an existential threat to this planet. And we must respond aggressively. We must listen to the scientists. That is what our plan does.
I think there's folks out who just heard you talk about higher taxes and taxpayers out there paying more. Would you guarantee to the American public tonight that the responsibility for $16.3 trillion, which is a massive amount of money, wouldn't end up on taxpayers' shoulders?
Well, it'll end up on some taxpayers' shoulders. If you are in the fossil fuel industry, you're going to be paying more in taxes, that's for sure. Yeah. And I happen to believe in general that at a time when we have massive levels of income and wealth inequality, where the richest 3 people in this country own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, where major profitable corporations like Amazon, who made over $10 billion in profits last year, didn't pay a nickel in taxes. Am I going to guarantee Jeff Bezos he's not going to be paying more in taxes? No, I won't.
I want you to meet Justine Burfond, is it?
Burfond, yeah.
Good. Justine Burfond from Brooklyn. She's a student at New York University, a volunteer with the Sunrise Movement, which is a youth climate group. Justine, welcome.
Hi, Senator Sanders. It's really nice to meet you. My family has lived in southern Brooklyn for 4 generations. In 2012, I witnessed Hurricane Sandy ravage this area. You have wavered at times in your stance on eliminating the filibuster. How do you intend to implement the climate policy we need to prevent climate disasters like Sandy if bad actors like Senator Mitch McConnell intend to use the filibuster to block climate legislation?
No, I haven't wavered. What I believe is the Senate should not be the House, and we shouldn't simply have a majority body. But what I have said repeatedly is we need major filibuster reform. And second of all, just as Bush got through major tax breaks for the rich through the Budget Reconciliation Act, we can do that as well. So if your question is, and we're going to need 60 votes to save the planet, the answer is no, we will not. There are ways to get that to the Budget Reconciliation Act, which will require 51 votes. And that's the method we will use. Okay?
I want you to meet Mark Alessi. He's a graduate student. Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Alessi, he's a graduate student studying climate science at Cornell University, currently supports Senator Elizabeth Warren. Mark?
Hey, Mark.
Thank you. Senator Sanders, in your Green New Deal plan, you argue that nuclear energy is, quote, a false solution to the climate crisis. However, going forward, we will need every tiny contribution from all renewable energy sources, especially since nuclear energy production doesn't depend on the time of day or the current weather conditions. How can you dismiss this technology when it will be necessary in any drastic switch in our country's energy infrastructure?
Thank you, Mark. Well, here's the answer. Mark, we got a heck of a lot of nuclear waste, which, as you know, is going to stay around this planet for many, many, many thousands of years. And you know what? We don't know how to get rid of it right now. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to add more dangerous waste to this country and to the world when we don't know how to get rid of what we have right now. Number 2, in terms of cost, the truth is that it costs a lot more to build a new nuclear power plant today than it does to go to solar or to go to wind. So I think that it is safer and more cost effective to move to sustainable energies like wind, solar, and geothermal, and not nuclear.
We have another follow-up question about nuclear power from our chief climate correspondent, Bill Weir. Bill?
Yeah, Senator, I want to follow on Mark's question there. Currently, right now, the U.S. gets about 20% of our electricity and power from nuclear, while France is about 70%. Granted, they have much fewer reactors than we do. But do you really believe the French are that much more at risk as we stand here tonight, and of what exactly? And since renewables like solar and wind take so much more land, how can you possibly go carbon neutral without nuclear in the short term?
I mean, I think the scientists tell us, in fact, that we can. And I think if you talk to the people in Japan, in terms of what happened in Fukushima, talk to the people in Russia, what happened in Chernobyl, you know what? They may not feel so comfortable with nuclear power. So I'm not a fearmonger here, and I wish the people in France the very best. But I think that the way forward, the most cost-effective way forward, the way forward that is safest, is moving to sustainable energies like wind and geothermal.
Senator Sanders, just today, the Trump administration announced plans to overturn requirements on energy-saving light bulbs. It's obviously a move that could increase greenhouse gas emissions. Would you reinstate those requirements as
Look, you know, it is...
I guess I should have asked, how fast would you reinstate those requirements?
It's fast. Look, one of the great things that's happening, and which gives us some hope, is that there has been an explosion in technology in many, many areas, that if we have the political will to utilize that technology, we can maybe save the planet. And by the way, let me just say this at this point before we get to light bulbs, and that is, everybody in this room knows, I mean, this is a difficult issue. Nobody has a magical solution, I don't. But this is not just an American issue. This is an issue that impacts the entire world. So what I would do, unlike President Trump, who has turned his back on this issue, in fact made it significantly worse by expanding the use of fossil fuel, what I will do, and I'm not here to tell you that I think it will happen like this, but I think it's worth the try, that in this extraordinary moment of global crisis, I think we need a president, hopefully Bernie Sanders, that reaches out to the world, to Russia and China and India, Pakistan, all the countries over the world, and say, guess what? Whether you like it or not, we are all in this together. And if you are concerned about the children in your country and future generations, we're going to have to work together. And maybe, just maybe, instead of spending $1.5 trillion every single year on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, maybe we pool those resources and we work together against our common enemy, which is climate change. Yeah. So now, one of the actually, I've followed this issue of LED light bulbs and so forth, and there have been huge breakthroughs. I mean, you all know that we use a much less electricity. These light bulbs last a lot longer, and it is a major, major breakthrough. But that also speaks, Anderson, to the issue of energy efficiency. So it's not just moving to sustainable energies, it is also being much more efficient in terms of the energy that we use. So if you can get electricity from a light bulb that utilizes 1/10 of the power that an old incandescent light bulb used, of course you're going to do that. Of course you're going to encourage that technology. In Vermont, we are making it as easy as possible, helping people buy those light bulbs. And it is in my community in Burlington, Vermont, if I am not mistaken, over the last many years, despite good economic growth, we are not using any more electricity than we did 10 years ago because we have put investments into energy efficiency. So that's the direction we've got to go.
I got to take a quick break. Senator Sanders, we'll have more with the senator in a moment. We've got more questions, plus Senator Warren. Mayor Pete Buttigieg will take the stage as well. We'll be right back. Questions from Democratic presidential candidates. Up next, we're going to hear from Senator Elizabeth Warren. I want to continue right now with Senator Bernie Sanders. Let's take another question from our audience. Martha Redioff is a teacher from New Milford, Connecticut. Martha, welcome.
Good evening. Human population growth has more than doubled in the past 50 years. The planet cannot sustain this growth. I realize this is a poisonous topic for politicians, but it's crucial to face. Empowering women and educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Well, Martha, the answer is yes. And the answer has everything to do with the fact that women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make reproductive decisions. And the Mexico City Agreement, which denies American aid to those organizations around the world that allow women to have abortions or even get involved in birth control, to me is totally absurd. So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
I want to introduce, our next guest, Grennan Milliken. He's a graduate student at Columbia University studying climate and society. Grennan?
Good evening. In order to successfully mitigate the impacts of climate change in the U.S., we're going to the U.S. is realistically going to have to wean itself off of fossil fuel use completely. Unfortunately, this can also mean the loss of jobs. How would you help workers of the fossil fuel industry transition to other respectable fields of work in a future green economy?
Thank you very much for that important question. I consider myself to be perhaps the most pro-worker member of the United States Congress. I think I have a 100% pro-union AFL-CIO voting record, and I've spent my entire life fighting for workers. So let me be very clear, is that the coal miners in this country, the men and women who work on the oil rigs, they are not my enemy. What is my enemy is climate change. And what we have done is built into our plan, our $16 trillion plan, tens and tens of billions of dollars for what we call a just transition. And that says that if some worker, through no fault of his own or her own, loses their job because we're moving away from fossil fuel, we're going to guarantee them an income for 5 years. We're going to guarantee them the education that they need, because those workers are not our enemies. They should not be punished because we're trying to save the planet.
I just want to ask, of all your ambitious plans, free public college, Medicare for all, eliminating student debt,
Keep going.
full employment,
Yeah,
Green New Deal,
good.
every president has to prioritize in terms of what they're going to put. What is the priority on climate change compared to all these others if you have to choose?
Well, I have the radical idea that a sane Congress can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. And you know, Anderson, there are so many crises that are out there today. I worry very much that we lose 30,000 people a year because they don't have the money to go to a doctor when they should, and that 87 million people are uninsured or underinsured. And I will implement as president a Medicare for all single-payer program. I am terribly worried that hundreds of thousands of bright kids no longer go to college. Guess they're worried about the debt that they'll incur. We're going to cancel all student debt. So to my mind, it's not prioritizing this over that. It is finally having a government which represents working families and the middle class rather than wealthy campaign contributors. And when you do that, then things fall in place. So you can raise the minimum wage to a living wage. But in terms of this issue, I don't know how any sane person cannot put it at the very, very top of the list. So let me state it again. We are, in my view, not in my view, in the view of the scientists who have studied this issue the most, we are fighting for the survival of the planet Earth, our only planet. How is this not a major priority? It must be a major priority.
Let me ask you. Last month, you tweeted, Donald Trump believes climate change is a hoax. Donald Trump is an idiot. Do you feel...
Did I say that?
Well...
Yeah, I did.
You know,
my wife thought it wasn't a good idea, but I said...
Well, let me ask you. There's obviously tens of millions of Americans who support Donald Trump and who believe him on climate change. Are they idiots?
No. Look, what you got, Donald Trump is the only president of the United States that we have. And when you have a president who has access to all of the scientific information, who can make a phone call and bring every bloody scientist in the world into his office in a few days' notice, when you have a president of the United States who rejects and turns his back on that science, you know, maybe it was a harsh word, but he's called me worse. So, yeah, I mean, I think it is just idiotic, if you like, that a president takes that has that type of approach toward climate change. And again, it is, forget the word idiot, it is so dangerous. It is dangerous. We are the most powerful country on earth. We should be leading the world to a global energy transition, and you have a president who thinks it's not real. That is idiotic.
This is Catherine Duckett. This is Catherine Duckett. She's a climate science professor at Monmouth University, a member of the Long Branch, New Jersey Environmental Commission. Catherine?
Hey, Catherine.
Hello, Professor. I wanted to ask you about FEMA rules. FEMA rules.
Yeah.
Are you in favor of changing FEMA rules to encourage retreat from properties that have suffered repeated catastrophic losses?
Yes.
And if so, how would you implement those changes in a way that's fair and equitable?
Well, as I understand what you're saying, we have the absurd situation where FEMA will only pay to repair a facility or an piece of infrastructure where it was before it was destroyed. That's pretty stupid. I mean, if it was destroyed once and you rebuild it, it's destroyed twice. Doesn't make a lot of sense to put it there again. So the answer is absolutely, which raises even the broader question of how we are going to protect communities. Look, we're not going to turn this thing around tomorrow. I worry very much. I was just in South Carolina last week. There are scientists who think that parts of Charleston, South Carolina, parts of Miami will be underwater. What do we do to protect those communities? What do we do to protect poor people and people of color, by the way, who are often the hardest hit by environmental degradation and the impact of climate change? And we have substantial sums of money to do that as well.
So would people in coastal communities who have a house right on the beach, would they have to move?
Well, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to rebuild that house so that it is, knocked down again in the next storm. And
so how do you make that happen as president?
Well, you do your best through carrots and sticks at the federal level. But, if people want to rebuild in an area which will be devastated by the next storm, they're certainly not going to get any federal assistance from my administration to do that.
Let me just quickly ask you about cars, electric cars. Yep. Everybody, obviously, we all love our cars and trucks. How do you manage to get people to relinquish, the car they love for a car, electric car that may be slower or less powerful initially?
Well, you do it with financial incentives. You make it worth people's while by heavily subsidizing the industry. We can create a whole lot of jobs by moving away from internal combustion engine cars to electric cars. And every day these cars are developing a longer range and they're more powerful. But look, at the end of the day, Anderson, this is where I start from. If I start from the moral position that we have no choice but to do everything that we can with countries all over the world to save this planet for our children and future generations. And that will mean change. That will mean change. And I think that what a president of the United States has got to do is make it clear to the people of our country and the world what the dangers are if we do not act. What is the alternative? Nobody in this room, just think about it, 30 years from now, wants to look your kid or your grandchild in the eye and have that child say to you, Grandpa, you knew back in 2020, 2019, what the scientists were saying. You didn't do anything, and look what you created. Look at the world that you gave me. That is not anything that I want anybody in this room or in this country to have to face.
We have a video from a questioner. Rachel Duvac is her name. She's a retired minister and a psychologist from Denver, Colorado. Rachel?
As we move toward trying to save our planet, how will you address the concerns of businesses, especially small ones, who will be expected to conform to changes in the law to protect our environment that might cost them money, i.e. using sustainable products?
Well, the reason we are making such a big investment is to incentivize and protect small businesses and homeowners all over this country. My goal is to see a massive increase in the use of wind and solar, and we will help people being able to afford to pay for it. I'll give you just an example of one of the crazy things that goes on right now. If you install, and we have, Jane and I have put solar on our house, and it turns out with the tax credits that we got, we pay it off in 7 or 8 years, and then we have free electricity. It's a pretty good investment. We can't afford to do that. There are a lot of families that cannot afford that $15,000 or $16,000. So we're going to make it possible to lend those people that money to put the solar up on their roofs. They will not be paying a nickel more than they're currently paying for electricity, and then they're going to have free electricity after that. That is a sane approach, which also creates jobs. Those are the kinds of things that we want to do for small business and homeowners.
Let me just ask you, during a war, during a crisis, presidents in the past have asked Americans to sacrifice in different ways. I guess for someone listening at home tonight, what is the greatest personal sacrifice you are asking an American to make for climate change, to stop climate change?
Well, I think we are, we're going to have to change. We're going to have to change the nature of many of the things that we're doing right now, many of the products that we're using. You used an example. There are people who like their car, which is an internal combustion engine. And we're going to have to say to those people, please, let's work together to save the planet. Maybe people like old-fashioned light bulbs. We're going to have to say we can save an enormous amount of electricity by using LEDs. So I think that in its totality, what we are saying to people that in agriculture, for example, we are saying that we're going to end factory farming because that is not only, that is a danger to the environment and to climate change. And, you know, there will be a transition. There will be a transition and there will be some pain there. We're going to put money into protecting family-based agriculture, where people can, instead of having products, food products, transported all over all over the world or all over the country, you can get that food to do as much as we can, get it locally. So there's going to be change, and we're going to have to ask people to understand that we have got to make those changes now, even though they may be a little bit uncomfortable, for the sake of future generations.
Senator Sanders, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.